This is Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, presented by William Campbell.
Thank you for downloading episode 38 of Here's How. Sinn Féin performed well in the polls in the years between the 2011 election and the one earlier this year, but how well did they do in the election? And how well will they do in opposition? On this podcast, one of the party's leading thinkers answers the questions.
Here's How is Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast. Make your view heard. Just dial 076 603 5060 and tell the world what you're thinking. Your voicemail may be included in the next podcast. You can find tips on recording your contribution and other ways to contact the show at here'show.ie/call.
The last time I spoke to Eoin Ó Broin, he was a councillor on South Dublin County Council. He's now TD for Dublin Mid-West. Congratulations, Eoin. You won in grand style. You topped the poll in a constituency where Sinn Féin didn't have a TD previously. But did you feel overall Sinn Féin maybe performed a bit disappointingly? You were 10 points below in the election where you were in the polls a year previously.
No, I think any party that significantly increases its share of the vote and its number of seats comes out of an election pleased. We took 23 TDs. Our vote share was up significantly, and in about 10 constituencies, including my own, we doubled our vote and we came in on average at 24%. So clearly there are constituencies out there where we need to do more work and there are more seats for us to take the next time round. But no, we were pretty pleased with the result overall.
Sure, but in the pre-election years, or the between-election years 12, 13, 14 and 15, in almost every single one of the polls, you were at 20% or higher, and in half the polls, you were ahead of either Fianna Fáil or Gael or both. You didn't realise that on election day.
Well, in fact, the result that we got on election day was pretty in line with the polls of the polls in the run-up to the election campaign itself. Okay,
that's fair enough. And my real question is, after the election, do you think you've been outmanoeuvred because what you would think most people would regard as the big conservative parties barely got 50% of the vote, but it seems like they're controlling both the government and the opposition?
Yeah, and of course the issue is, while they got barely 50% of the vote, they got significantly more in terms of the seats, and their percentage share of seats in the Dáil is a little bit bigger. I mean, we do have this very unusual situation where the two centre-right parties are essentially trying to dominate both government and opposition. But I think it's going to be very tricky for them, particularly for Fianna Fáil. So you had the spectacle of Fianna Fáil this week having promised to abolish Irish water and water charges in their election manifesto, effectively siding with the government to block a motion calling for the abolition of Irish water and water charges. So I don't think it's a sustainable position for Fianna Fáil to be both the alleged leader of the opposition and the facilitator of Enda Kenny's Taoiseach. And I think the more people see that, the more they'll see it for what it is. Our focus is on the issues that people elected me in Dublin Mid-West to raise: our water, our housing, our health, our education, our childcare, and our precarious jobs. And what we've been trying to do, both before the government was formed and since, is keep the focus on those issues and the need for real policy change to start tackling the deficits that are having negative impacts on people's lives. And again, I think the more we do that, I think the more people will realise that Sinn Féin is the kind of party they want to see grow in the future.
I think you're right that it may well be an unsustainable position for Fianna Fáil, but it's a pretty audacious move to essentially try and be in government and leading the opposition at the same time.
You might call it audacious. I would call it fundamentally dishonest. You are either facilitating a government or you're opposing the government. You cannot be both. Enda Kenny's Taoiseach today because Fianna Fáil broke their election pledge on that issue, and they facilitated, through abstention on the vote of Taoiseach, they facilitated Enda Kenny's Taoiseach. Just like, for example, this week in the Dáil, they facilitated Fine Gael's opposition to Sinn Féin's motion for the abolition of water charges and Irish water. It's old-style cynical politics at its very worst. And again, I think the more people see it, the more people judge it for what it is.
You could well be right on that, but don't you think it'll take maybe some innovative manoeuvring from Sinn Féin? And I'm thinking, for example, concentrating on water charges and on Irish water. The agreement between Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, fully 1/3 of the text of that was about Irish water. Irish water is 1/3 of 1% of the Irish economy. Are you perhaps being distracted by that?
Well, first of all, we don't decide our own approach to politics on the basis of what Fianna Fáil or any other party are doing. We have a set of commitments we made to the electorate on a range of issues, and the work that we're doing in here as a Dáil team and the work that Sinn Féin activists across the state are doing in terms of their campaigning and constituency work is determined by those commitments. So water is a part of our agenda, a very important part, but so too, for example, is the housing and homeless crisis. Sinn Féin was instrumental in setting up the Dáil Housing and Homelessness Committee. I'm on that committee. We're meeting 8 times a week over 6 weeks to produce a report for government before the 17th of June. And that's all about trying to ensure that the incoming government and new Minister for Housing starts to implement real solutions to that crisis in housing and homelessness. Likewise, Louise O'Reilly, my colleague who's been given the health portfolio, is doing the same in health. Patrick Tobin is doing the same in regional development and issues around rural development and regeneration, and the list goes on. So, obviously, water has been a big issue this week because we had a PMB, but that is only one of a large number of issues our team here is working on and will continue to work on in the weeks and months ahead.
Mm-hmm. But do you take my point in general that there are some maybe hot button issues that can generate a lot of clicks on Facebook likes and can generate a lot of heat, but at the end of the day, might not have the importance that the amount of attention they can generate justifies?
Well, anybody who thinks the crumbling water infrastructure and sanitation infrastructure in this state isn't an important issue obviously hasn't been paying much attention. If you watched the primetime special on water only a few weeks ago that I participated in, there were images of commercial and domestic sewage being pumped into our rivers and seas. Water is a huge issue. It's not just about the charge, although the charge has to go. It's about putting in place a model that delivers world-class water and sanitation services for people. We have one of the worst water systems in the European Union. Of course, it's no accident. We have one of the worst health systems, one of the worst housing systems, and that's no reflection on the hard work of doctors or nurses or public officials in our local authority housing departments. It's a direct consequence of the failure of successive Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael-led governments to invest in the services that people need. So why is water important to us? For the same reason as health is important, or education, or housing, or childcare, because these are the services that people pay for in their taxes, and they need to have a good quality of life. And again, what determines the issues that Sinn Féin raises in the Dáil is not whether or not something gets likes on Facebook. It's whether it's important to the people who elected us and whether we believe we have credible alternative solutions to the failed politics and policies implemented by Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael in the past.
One last question. You mentioned, of course, you're on the Housing Committee. A lot of the suggestions that are being promoted seem to be ones that don't have a lot of weight with economists. So, for example, giving extra subsidies in whatever way to first-time buyers, that tends, the economic theory at least, would dictate that tends just to inflate prices. Rent caps and so forth tend to reduce the amount that is likely to go into building and developing new residences. Do you have anything that is innovative that's likely to work?
Well, first of all, there have been 70 written submissions to the committee. We're having 8 hearings a week over 6 or 7 weeks. So the number and breadth of proposed solutions to the housing and homelessness crisis that we're considering is vast. And those 2 that you've mentioned are not reflective of any general trend. I would have some sympathy with what you're saying about Help to Buy schemes. I think there's lots of evidence to say they push up prices. Nobody is proposing rent controls. Nobody has come to committee to say rent controls. People are advocating rent certainty, which is a very different thing. And there are lots of economists who actually think it's a very good idea, as well as those of us who have a knowledge of housing policy. I mean, there are a number of things that just need to happen. The first is local authorities and housing associations need to be given more money to buy, to refurbish and to build the housing that those people who have the most acute housing needs need to live in. And that could happen very quickly. In addition to that, we need more medium-term measures to increase the overall supply of both social and affordable housing. And there's a lot of good ideas that the committee will be considering before we do our final report. Crucially, we need to stop people becoming homeless. The number of individuals and families who are becoming homeless on a daily basis continues to flood the emergency accommodation across the country, not even in Dublin and Cork, but in rural Ireland too. So the things that are pushing people into homelessness, and they are spiralling out of control, rents in the private rental sector, low levels of rent supplement and housing assistance payment, increasing numbers of repossessions, particularly of buy-to-let properties. We need to look at ways of addressing those concerns so that less people become homeless while we're increasing the supply of social and affordable housing for those people who need it. None of this is rocket science. In two previous periods, Irish government significantly increased the supply of social and affordable housing in the building schemes in the 50s and 70s. The economy wasn't in much better shape back then than it is now. So if we were able to do it then, obviously in a slightly different context in 2016, we can do some of those things now. And again, I think you'll see hopefully a strong level of cross-party and independent consensus in the final report, because if we do a really good, short, focused report with key recommendations, that'll land on the desk of the new Minister for Housing, Simon Coveney, as he's developing his new action plan for housing, which has to be ready in August. And we could have real influence on that plan, which would make a real difference to the families of the 2,000 children who will sleep in emergency accommodation tonight, or the tens of thousands of families who are in real housing stress.
And how about taxing vacant property?
Yeah, well, as you know, Sinn Féin has long argued for vacant site taxes and vacant property taxes. The issue is whether or not we can convince the Minister for Finance to introduce them. And again, we're looking at some of those. Ultimately, what we want houses bought and built for people to live in. And we've seen from the Housing Agency's report today, anything up to 230,000 vacant units across the state, even if the figure is less than that on the basis.
It's still a huge number.
There's still a large number of properties there. We also have large amounts of public land that's available through local authorities, but they haven't been able to build on it because the Department of Environment won't give them the money, and the Department of Finance won't allow them to borrow from the Housing Finance Agency. So, there are things that need to be done and need to be done quickly. And if it's an issue of having to find some off-balance mechanism to get that capital finance into the social housing sector, then let's find a way of doing it. If you have the political will, a lot of these things can be achieved.
Eoin Ó Broin, newly elected TD for Dublin Mid-West for Sinn Féin, thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you, William.
If you like the Here's How podcast, please rate and review the show on iTunes and other podcast providers. Share it on Facebook and Twitter. Tell your friends. But most of all, make your views heard. Call us on 076 603 5060.
That's almost the end of episode 38 of Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, published on the 8th of June 2016. There's links to the articles we mentioned and other references in the show notes, which you can find on the website. If you can think of a topic that you think should be covered in a future show, or if you want to suggest someone to include, and that could be yourself, then let me know. If you like the podcast, please go on iTunes and give it a rating or even write a nice review. Also, please like the show on Facebook, follow the podcast on Twitter @Here'sHowPodcast, follow Eoin Ó Broin on Twitter @EOBrin, and subscribe to the show so new shows automatically come into your podcast feed. You can use iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, or any other podcast app or software. If you don't know how to do that, there's step-by-step instructions on the website, and you can get in touch. It's all at www.here'show.ie. The next show will be uploaded on Wednesday, the 14th of June. The Here's How podcast is produced and presented by me, William Campbell. Thank you for listening.